but they want to throw things out there and tie things into other things. But what do we know about AIDS? Let's go into the science of AIDS. According to the National Academy of Science, 29% of AIDS or HIV is what?
Visna.
Is Visna. Is that are we saying that? No, that's the U.S., the National Academy of Science. They said 29% of AIDS consists of Visna. What is Visna, Z? Visna is an Icelandic sheep's disease. Where is this found at?
Iceland.
In Iceland. That's where it's found at. But when we research Visna, where was Visna first tested at? And who was it tested on?
On the Jews.
Hitler was testing Visna in the 1930s. He was testing it on the Jews. What happened to all those Jewish scientists and doctors?
They were by Project Paperclip. They were reinserted into the American government.
Okay, so under Project Paperclip, they were recruited to come work for the U.S. and continue their studies, right? So we can say they contributed to AIDS, right? We can make that assumption. At the same time that Hitler was testing Visna, the American government was experimenting with black men with the Tuskegee experiment. Now, they say that they only didn't tell the men that there was a cure for it, and they let them go around spreading it. But that's a lie. They were infecting those military men with syphilis. And proof of this is when you go to the 1940s, we have now documentation that shows that the U.S. went into Guatemala and was infecting those people with syphilis and watching them spread it. And we have the documents, and then that's what President Obama and Hillary Clinton were on record apologizing for. But what were they doing here? What is the logic behind this? What is the science? What were they trying to understand? Warriors, help me out. Why did they infect those people with syphilis? What was the objective?
To find out, they were just gaining data, like how it spread, how long it would take to spread, who it would spread to.
How last? Just watching the spread. They were just collecting data. That's it. Data intel. That's it. When we're talking about AIDS, we're talking about biological warfare.
There was an extraordinary apology today from President Obama for something that happened more than 60 years ago. The U.S. conducted secret medical experiments that involved intentionally infecting Guatemalan mental patients with sexually transmitted diseases. Tonight, Guatemala is calling it a crime against humanity and says it may take the case to an international court. NBC's chief science correspondent Robert Bizzell broke the story this morning. He has this late update tonight.
The secret experiments took place in Guatemala between 1946 and 1948, financed by the U.S. government and supervised by U.S. government doctors. Susan Reverby, a professor at Wellesley College, who has studied medical malfeasance extensively, found the evidence in U.S. government records.
I thought that, frankly, that I wouldn't get shocked, but I thought this one was pretty horrific. The details of how they did it were pretty graphic, and I was actually quite surprised.
The doctors inoculated almost 700 prostitutes, institutionalized mental patients, and prisoners with the germs that cause either syphilis or gonorrhea. The subjects did not give their permission and were not told what was happening. They were injected in the skin, the genitals, even the spine. Infected female prostitutes were also sent into the prison and mental hospital to infect men.
They knew that this wasn't appropriate. The Surgeon General even said we couldn't do this in the United States.
The miracle of penicillin.
The experiments were designed to study the effects of penicillin on sexually transmitted disease. Still, as many as a third of the patients were not properly treated. Today, outrage on the streets of Guatemala's capital and in newspapers online. And recalls the infamous Tuskegee, Alabama syphilis experiment.
What is now called the Tuskegee experiment began here in 1932.
From 1932 until the research was revealed in the press in 1972, government doctors lied to hundreds of African-American men. The doctors, some also involved in the Guatemala experiment, told the men they were getting treatment, but in fact they were not.
We're talking about biological warfare. Now, proof of that is in a document called HR 15090. What is HR 15090, guys? Who can get that to me?
It was
House Resolution.
House Resolution 15090.
What's the most important part of that resolution? What page?
129.
Why? What did it say on page 129? It said on page 129, the U.S. Pentagon went before Congress and they asked for what?
$10 million.
They said
to create a synthetic biological agent that will deplete the immune system.
They said if you give us $10 million, we would create a synthetic biological agent and we would deplete the immune system. And they even go on to say that we could have it ready in 10 years. 10 years from 1969 is what?
1979, when the first cases of
when the first
AIDS
cases
happened.
with that hepatitis B vaccine, right? So that's right on time. Okay, now I'm going to throw another one at y'all. I bet you guys don't get this one. Who can tell me the project director for the U.S. Special Virus Cancer Program?
Dr. Robert Gallo.
Dr. Robert Gallo. And what is Dr. Robert Gallo credited for?
Isolated the HIV his recorded with Special Virus Program contract number. NIS.
Historic records prove the secret intensification of the biological weapons race in America make the Soviet efforts pale by comparison. Here to prove it are three of the most stunning and condemning documents in biological warfare history. First is a never declassified congressional record of 1969 showing the Department of Defense requested $10 million to develop, quote, synthetic biological agents for germ warfare, end quote, through the National Academy of Sciences, National Research Council, that is, the NAS-NRC. That's nearly half of the amount of money given to all of biological weaponry that year. These new laboratory creations were descriptively and functionally identical to HIV/AIDS. Mind you, this was 15 years before the contested discovery of the AIDS virus by this man, Dr. Robert Gallo, who, as you will see in a minute, oversaw Litton Bionetics, the Army's sixth leading biological weapons contractor at that time. Bionetics also operated the entire administration of the National Cancer Institute's programs at Fort Detrick at that time as well. This private company was a medical subsidiary of the mega military weapons contractor called Litton Industries. Litton's president, Roy Ashe, was Nixon's alternate for the National Security Advisor post he gave to Kissinger. In consolation, the president made Ashe his White House chief of American business and industry. As Roy Ashe was joining the Nixon White House staff, Kissinger ordered Admiral Zumwalt of the Navy to do a reassessment of America's biological weapons capabilities. The Navy has always been at the forefront of such things. Bioweapons were cheaper to make and could be made to target certain people, even certain ethnic groups. There is no doubt that Fort Detrick's sudden cancer focus was part of a greater depopulation plan. According to congressional records and his biographer, Time magazine's managing editor, Walter Isaacson, Kissinger selected the option presented by Admiral Zumwalt to develop AIDS-like and Ebola-like bioweapons, and the contract went to his White House colleague's company, Litton Bionetics. There is now no doubt that Dr. Gallo officiated the development of these AIDS complex viruses. His group at Bionetics combined leukemia, lymphoma, and sarcoma viruses from various species of animals nearly 15 years before he was credited by the Department of Health and Human Services for having discovered the cause of AIDS, a similar retrovirus. They said this would lead to a cure, an AIDS vaccine within 3 years. It never happened. I managed to catch up to Dr. Gallo at the 11th International Conference on AIDS in Vancouver in 1997. I asked him if he was concerned that some of his experiments might have given rise to the AIDS virus or AIDS virus relatives that might have contaminated monkeys and chimpanzees shipped by Litton to the Merck's vaccine division in New York for the production of the earliest hepatitis B vaccines.
And Gallo, Sarin et al. Were Litton Bionetics researchers were your co-authors in which you combined cat leukemia and chicken sarcoma viruses to create to evaluate the leukemia sarcoma complex models.
I'm really smart. Yes, we did it. Everything was created by us working in the laboratory. Look, just for those with some little bit of understanding of this, who care about this kind of idea. I mean, I've had a lot of things said, but I've never had anything quite like that one. There were people who thought and made postulations that, and it was not actually directed at me, this is a good one, a new one, but that HIV could have been created in laboratory experiments. There are two answers to that are definitive, conclusive, that no scientist could have deliberately created them unless he was a super genius and 10 years ahead of his time. The AIDS virus definitively existed long before molecular cloning. That's point one. Point two, we know the full sequence, the genome of HIV. It was published by our lab in 1985 and by a group from Paris around the same time. The genome has no homology to any known existing virus in the world, except SIV, discovered after it. Has nothing to do with cats, has nothing to do with chicken sarcoma viruses. SV40 is a DNA virus that comes from little animals that can transform cells in culture, has no sequences in HIV. Further, we never worked with SV40 with those viruses together, and if we did, the whole thing would be irrelevant. And I think you need to begin with Biology 101 high school, okay?
These documents, including the U.S. government contracts, best explain how AIDS emerged on two far-removed continents in black Africans and gay New Yorkers by 1978. These were precisely the populations that received the first hepatitis B vaccines produced in Litton's chimpanzees just 4 years earlier. By the way, the man sitting to Dr. Robert Gallo's right is Dr. Jonathan Mann. At the time, Dr. Mann was the AIDS czar for the World Health Organization. Not long after Dr. Mann witnessed my exchange with Gallo, he quit his most esteemed position, saying, quote, far more than a medical problem, AIDS is a socio-political imposition, end quote.
Yeah, I'm about to go in. Yeah. Let's get it. This is the manuscript, my lyrics are catastrophic. Punchlines and metaphors leave you stiff like catatonics. Your thoughts are microscopic.